So, tarot as a spiritual tool. It's a delight to be able to share this recording with you. So, I'm Jean-Michel David, and over the course of my life, I've been exposed to tarot in various ways. So, perhaps it is not surprising that it has become a cornerstone of the tools I find useful in inner transformative work. It's perhaps because of this that I have supported a variety of strivings in the world of tarot, from creating a Tarotpedia and the Association for Tarot Studies, as well as organizing various conferences and supporting many of the vast developments in the world of tarot. Though I have numerous decks, both traditional and modern, it is to its foundation to which I repeatedly return, as may be evident from my book, Reading the Marseille Tarot. But why tarot? In a sense, tarot is the modern Western esoteric equivalent to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. They are symbolic aphorisms pictorially given as authentic symbols, as Valentin Tomberg indicates very early in his Méditation sur les 22 arcanes majeures du tarot, translated into English as Meditations on the Tarot. They are neither merely allegories nor secrets. Instead, as authentic symbols, to quote from the same book, these images are cachent et révèlent à la fois leur sens à fur et à mesure de la profondeur du recueillement de celui qui les médite. In other words, they simultaneously conceal and reveal their sense gradually according to the contemplative depth reached by the meditator. As with much else on this, I entirely agree with the author of that book. As tarot unveils itself to our inner reflections, to our contemplative beholding, to the ruminations of our heart, I am going to suggest that it unveils in a manner that reflects the universal human condition. And in that sense, we will find parallels, or if you prefer, we will find similar unveilings in other places. As I therefore speak of the Kabbalah, or paneurythmy, or medieval cathedral petroglyphs, or anthroposophy, or alchemy, or considerations of sacred geometry, we should expect to find spiritual insights similarly unveiled. Let me begin by giving a brief introduction to tarot. Even though many amongst you are undoubtedly already quite familiar with the images and the sequence, it is worth for a moment to not only revisit these, as well as to remind ourselves of its structure and a little of its historical development. Tarot arises in European culture by the 15th century. The earliest known decks, such as the one created for the Visconti Sforza family, I personally consider more like prototypes in tarot's development. Why? Because two important factors. On the one hand, they do not as yet clearly have the structure of tarot, either in the total number of trumps, nor are they clearly sequenced. Though, of course, we may simply be unaware of their actual sequence as otherwise indicated by the Boiardo poem. Secondly, there is something that seems to be still in development, as if with those decks, the spiritual work, striving to make itself manifest into symbolic images, had to persist to overcome human frailty and find its place. By the time we get to the early 16th century, however, tarot has finally manifested, or metaphorically speaking, incarnated, with the earliest known full deck to have survived being the Noblet deck. Well, even here, a few pip cards are missing from the deck, but we know what these are without any need for reservation. I should perhaps here mention that, of course, tarot, as with any other spiritual, symbolic, or even a recipe, any communication device, or even a social convention, does not arise in a vacuum. Tarot arises in rich soil, having its roots in more ancient esoteric precedents, in developments that occur in medieval Europe, infused with developments from not only traditional Christian sources, but also those of late antiquity and earlier, from Rome to Judea, from ancient Greece to Egypt, from Sumeria, Babylonia to streams even further afield, and even from the metamorphosis of Manichaean spiritual flowering. Please note that these are not when tarot formed, but rather they are elements absorbed through, to continue the analogy, its root hairs, into which this heritage acts as mineral and salt, which are dissolved and coagulate as tarot's spiritual archetype descends to form the now familiar images. Perhaps I could here again quote from a passage from this time the 10th letter of Meditations on the Tarot, where the author says, "The authors who saw in the tarot the sacred book of Thoth were both right and wrong at the same time. They were right insofar as they traced back the history of the essence of tarot to antiquity, notably to ancient Egypt. And they were wrong insofar as they believed that the tarot had been inherited from ancient Egypt, i.e., that it had been transmitted from generation to generation, subject to minor iconographic changes." Allow me to spell this out a little more, for it is not only an important distinction, as well as something that sees many people on what may be perceived as the two sides of the fence. Tarot, as tarot, emerges around precisely at the time that Rudolf Steiner mentions as the beginning of a new age of consciousness development, something he terms consciousness soul, which begins to develop around the year 1440. Tarot can be used as an aid to this spiritual striving and awakening, or not. Tarot, therefore, presents itself to us as a tool that, as any tool, can of course be utilized for a variety of purposes, from gaming, reflective work, psychological processes, and of course as sacred iconography. In this presentation, I shall bring together some elements that are integrated in a manner that I see as natural. Natural not in a sense of the designer's intent, but natural as reflective of inner transformations as one walks the path of the mountain of the adept, seeks to enter the inner chambers of the heart, in which the sacred marriage may produce the transmutation from deadened lead to living gold, a path that requires ongoing transformation, or to use a more efficient term derived from the Greek and certainly in important usage in Christian development, metanoia, a turning of the heart. A turning that at each new awakening, each new insight, each new unveiling of the worlds brings with it a corresponding ascent towards or into the depths of spiritual realm. How does tarot aid this process? On the one hand, we need to have a look at the structure of tarot, which in the first place has a twofold pattern, or if you prefer, an exterior and an interior progression, each being part of the same process, seen from differing perspectives. Here, the Marseille's Roman numbering will assist us, especially as we allow a simple apprehension of these numbers. 1 to 9 is a progression of which we can speak and see in the outer world, and to which we are then invited to return or fold over with the wheel of Fortuna, the turning even indicated by its Roman numeral X. Each of the subsequent images from 11 onwards brings the interiority of the images we have already placed. 11, 12, etc., respectively matching the outer faces of 1, 2, 3, etc., until we reach that incredible card which calls forth a re-emerging from the inner grave back into the outer world, but now into an awakened spiritual realm represented by 21, that ultimately presents its face to the world as but a fool, the fou. So here we can already see a structure from which numerous reflections and insights may be gained. The battleur is, for example, a tightrope walker, needs an inner courageous strength that masters and externalizes an aspect of oneself that is both noble and bestial. The ascent is similarly represented by what has come to be known through Kabbalah as the Tree of Life. It's HaChaim, first referred to in Genesis. Though the various common glyphs develop a little prior to the tarot, and through which, from a strict historical perspective, the developments of tarot and Kabbalah are independent, I will go so far as to suggest that at a deeper spiritual level, they have a connection, and one which may be instructive. We do need to be careful, however, not to assume that this connection occurs in what may be called the horizontal plane. Let me explain what I mean by this. Let us take ourselves as human beings and look at what I am going to suggest is our composite nature. We are essentially spiritual beings that incarnate into human flesh across lives. As we incarnate, we do so into and within a family, and hence with a genetic substrate. This provides us with what I would describe has horizontal influences, dispositions, tendencies, and constraints. We also have a vertical influence or tendency and grace, which we bring as we descend from the spiritual realm with our karmic needs and draws us forward. This intermixing of the two forces, also in a different manner represented in the 14th card, provides a picture worth reflecting upon. But here I am simply using it to illustrate that there is both a historical horizontal force as well as a vertical or spiritual force at work. So in a similar way, we could describe both tarot and Kabbalah as horizontal manifestations that allow the vertical impulse to incarnate. And it is this incarnation that allows us to see their internal connections at a deeper level, even as it may indeed be possible, perhaps likely, that within the tarot's early historical developments, a Kabbalistic alphabetic masquerade, as Mark Philippus calls it, makes itself evident and becomes a stabilizing presence in tarot's sequencing. This stabilizing influence manifests through the sequence of the 22 Hebrew letters. In meditative work, these form 231 gates through which we may work. Though here I am working more simply with 11 of these, the natural pairs mentioned earlier. And it is of course interesting that to indicate this triangular number of the 22 cards, only 21 are numbered, adding to a total of 231. 1 plus 2 plus 3, etc., up to plus 21 equals 231, which is also the number of meditative gates when each letter or image is paired with every other letter or image. As an aside, tarot has a multiple fourfold pattern, as does the Tree of Life. In tarot, the fourfold pattern is even implicit in the trumps, for 22 is the pentagonal number of base 4. But to return to the tree. For in this presentation, I will simply take the tarot pairs as given earlier and allow an ascent to take place from Malkut through to Keter. We end up with the following. There are specific considerations as to why I ascend from right to left in the lower Sephiroth and left to right in the supernals. But I shall simply leave that as is for now. The first thing we may pay attention to or notice is that the tree itself has various traditional forms, including two important ones. A circular version, the Rabbad version. Let me tell you a brief meditation a friend of mine, now a bishop in an autocephalic Catholic church derived from Brazil, had when meditating on the Tree of Life as emanation. He saw as if a pebble dropped, creating ripples in an otherwise still surface, into which a hand reached down and lifted the pebble, emerging as the more standard image of the Tree of Life. Working more with geometry, I took that representation and allowed it to reveal its three-dimensional structure, which for me took the form of three Platonic solids, each with a different possible faces, the dodecahedron, the hexahedron or cube, and the tetrahedron or three-sided pyramid. It is these spaces viewed front on that I have used from which to present Tarot's Ascent. We should not, however, fix things into non-movement. It is transformation, transmutation, integration that is at work. The ascent is an ascent into the center. So again, the representation of the circular tree is here important to simultaneously keep in mind. Furthermore, even the tree in its Platonic solid form unfolds and enfolds rather incredible properties. Let me show you something that I had discovered in meditation many years ago, and which now also has been shared by others who have similarly unveiled similar transformative properties of the solids. This, by the way, has important, at least for myself, tarot connections. A little on this later. If we take a dodecahedron incorporating the supernals of the tree, we can cut it along its internal cube and open and invert it to its next emanating manifestation as a cube. So let me show you. There is a brilliant illustrated rendering of this online at the moment. So here we have something that enables the supernals to shift, so to speak, or to transform, to become, or to reveal what already is through manifesting into another state, from dodecahedron to cube. There is, however, an internal space left. And the internal space is itself an inverted dodecahedron, which further expanded becomes a double tetrahedron. Let me again show you from my old model this. So what we now have is a representation of a 12-fold dodecahedron plus a 6-fold cube plus a basis for a 4-fold tetrahedron. A reminder of the 12 single letters plus the double letters minus the final tav, plus the 3 mother letters plus the 4th tav of the Hebrew alphabet, a total of 22. With, however, the hidden, well, not hidden, but only able to be seen during the transformative act, the cross, from which streams the unfolded rose. This, to me, exhibits important elements represented by tarot, to which I will more explicitly return for a short while as time is limited. Let us return to the tree and take as a short meditative reflection the three mother letters in Hebrew, Aleph, Mem, and Shin, the Batleur, death, and the world, cards 1, 13, and 21. Here we see that we not only have moved from the first numbered card to the last, the Fool remains unnumbered, but also that we know that there is something that follows, i.e. the Fool. We can also reflect that we are moving up the tree from bottom to top. What we are also doing, incidentally, is moving from one point of extremity through to its golden mean, through to the other point of extremity, yet incomplete. The inner point, that golden mean, is the eye of the needle of death. Now, as we intone the sequence of the letters, they too are highly instructive. Aleph is simply the opening of the throat, prior to the first sound. But in order to move from that point to the Mem, to death, all vowels have to be articulated and intoned, and then incredibly, with the full expiring vibration through death, comes the possibility for the influx of new breath, inhaled through as Shin, the spiritual, pranic, rejuvenating forces of life itself, from the very height of the spiritual realm, represented here as Divine Sophia herself allowing a new, renewed birth of the Logos. Allow me to bring to mind what this does. The opening of the throat, its sounding forth through its closing, produces the sound Aum. Then readied to inhale the influx of new energies through the nasal cavity. Aum. This Aum, by the way, is also expressed powerfully as the full release within Tiferet, within the very center from which we seek to transform, as also in Paneurythmy. Paneurythmy itself reflects this double ascent on the tree of life into the very heights of the spiritual realms, and then allows a double descent down the central axis of the tree. Yeah, and yet the whole is moved in a circle. When Peter Dunov brought forth Paneurythmy, he did not mention either tarot or Kabbalah in relation to it. Yet again, it is that spiritual stream, that vertical descent, as spiritual outpouring that I see reflected in the work he brought forth in Bulgaria at the beginning of the 20th century. Each of the movements of Paneurythmy follows precisely the sequence of tarot. On this ascent, in this process of awakening, of metamorphosis, of transmutation, of indeed transubstantiation. So I shall leave you then on this note. and allow another development of deep worth to be considered. The sacred and its various manifestations into sacred tonal vessels created by Franco Rossi. So, thank you.